Hello all, it's me, and welcome to this production where I've compiled all my footage from my first ever visit to the Georgetown Loop Railroad. It's all gonna be one heck of a ride through the Rocky Mountains on one of America's few abandoned lines reborn as a tourist railroad. In this case, from the ashes of the Colorado and Southern narrow gauge. Boy, was this so worth it! Just like it will be your time sitting through this whole video about Colorado's narrow gauge railroad that came back to life, yet is still overshadowed by the active remains of the Rio Grande narrow gauge in the southern portion of the state. My visit, which happened on August 2nd of 2025, got off to quite the beginning. As my dad and I were pulling into the parking lot, we got the perfectly timed greeting that will make any Railfan's face resemble a happy child in a heartbeat. Just right there. And I forgot all my problems.
Put it in my pocket, okay? Got it?
Well,
Well, sit back and enjoy while you can, so long as you're not on duty. Because I am going to let the remainder of this footage do all the talking.
Alright, folks, we'll be underway, so please find your seat. Alrighty, folks, you have noticed that we are underway, but you may have noticed that we're currently headed backwards. Now, this backwards movement takes us underneath the double-state viaduct to complete the loop section of our railroad. You see, contrary to popular belief, this line is not a circle. The loop refers to the point in which in the old days the trains would come from Denver's Union Station up this way, underneath this bridge, and then loop back over themselves about 7 minutes later. And to do the same, we'll back underneath this bridge and then loop back over it 7 minutes from now. Now the bridge you see above you is 75 feet above you, and it's a close replica to an original bridge built for winters of 1883 and 84 out of cast and wrought iron for the sum of $250,000. In today's money, that would have the main purchase tires about 14 million. Now, the original bridge stood until 1939, when it and the rest of the original railroad was scrapped, receiving a return investment of a whopping $650. Now, the current bridge you see here was built about 100 years later in the summers of 1983 and 84, with a sum of $1 million provided by the Becher Foundation. Now, it said this bridge is 5 times stronger than the original, built of reinforced steel, which is quite important, because the old timers would say that the original bridge would sway 5 feet each direction and sag in the middle, as locomotives and trains put over it. Now, folks will assure you that the modern bridge will not sway as much. Just kidding, folks, the modern bridge won't sway whatsoever. If it did, we'd be cheering on proudly from the other side. Now, in just one moment here, the brakeman and I will be coming through to punch your tickets, so please have them out and ready. And at this point, my spiel will continue until we reach Silver Plume. Now, with that said, enjoy your journey over to Georgetown Loop. folks, we've now come into the Silver Plume yard limits. This train did well over 100 years ago. Now you are welcome to stop off here at Silver Plume. We will be stopped here for approximately 15 minutes. Today we have original 1884 depot open, and it has a small gift shop inside of it today. Just to the right through that are the restrooms should you need to use them. Now the only area you will be permitted to smoke will be the parking area. Please be courteous should you choose to do so. And we do have a little railroad museum with some vintage pieces of Colorado and other equipment. And some rather scary looking mannequins. Now we will ask that you please return to the train by 4:35. That is 4:35. Welcome to Silver Plume, elevation 9,178 feet above sea level. Please remain seated until the train comes to a full and complete stop. Thank you. Please keep your hands inside on the train. Thank you. You're riding on today is a reconstructed portion of the old GB&L, the Georgetown, Breckenridge, and Leadville Railroad, which was built as an extension to a line known as the Colorado Central, constructed under a gentleman by the name of Loveland in 1870 out of Denver. This line made its way westbound, following Clear Creek for the towns of Arvada, Golden, Idaho Springs, and finally Georgetown in 1877. Shortly thereafter, the GB&L was constructed as a means of reaching as far as Leadville, with the intention to tunnel underneath of Loveland Pass. Now you see one of the financiers of this line was Jay Gould. But you see, the line reached Silver Plume by 1884, and by that point the Denver Southmark Pacific, via a joint agreement with the Rio Grande, had already accessed Leadville. So this line was only built about 5 miles further west through Graymarsh and Bakerville. And eventually, this line was just come back to Silver Plume. Now, Jay Gould happened to be a financier who will be visiting Denver later after on 7 to 10 days, so we'll join the world. Now, while this is just a stubby transplant out of Denver, it's still moving directly from Gould. Transporting the 9 hills over Arsenal, the line finished the 5 mills of Denver and Gould. Now that lasts until 1893 when the Sherman Silver Plume Act was repealed, and thus the prices are plummeted so low that mining current was no longer profitable. At that point, the primary form of revenue on this line was tourism. As the Georgetown Loop spread its fame throughout the country and even the world. There were once 7 trains daily out of Denver's Union Station. They would take you up to Silver Plume, 53.9 miles to the west, and then back down to Denver in time for dinner. Now, between the years of 1905 and 1918, the line existed out of Silver Plume known as the Argentine Central, which would take you onto the mining town of Walmart and up to the tip of Mobile and excess elevation 13,500 feet. Rocky statement, but so is our railroad, as we're currently entering into a descending grade of 4%. As a state for every 100 feet we travel, we drop in elevation nearly 4 feet. And for your reference, 3 of our cars is around 100 feet. Now because of this steep and rapid descent, the tracks that follow are known as the ladder tracks. As this railroad, like the original L, has been built as a narrow gauge line. Unlike most in our country, which are standard gauge lines. The difference being the physical gap or distance fell through rail, which in our case is 3 feet or 36 inches. Rails right up to 4 feet, 8 and 1/2 inches. Nothing turned into the Whipple Roman chariot or the 2 horses pulling that vehicle. On our gauge because it was far more practical for making up these steep grades and sharp curves. Now if you look to left and right, if you notice all these boulders. Now before the invention of heavy machinery, these had to be hand plucked with nitrogen black lasting powder, and those placing the charges would run for dear life. Who was chosen for this dangerous work for the most agile amongst us? Children aged 7 to 14. So next time here's your parents tell you to clean your room, remember there are far worse things to be doing. Now in just one moment here we'll be heading over to third feet for the first of 4 times there is any journey. If you have your parents out to the left side of the train, you might get a picture of a beautiful cascading waterfall. You would be advised though that the bridge does like a photoball. So unless you find a very 17th bridge hardware to be riveting, I suggest you hold those cameras high above your heads. And as we come off of the bridge with the water going to the left, we'll slowly be entering into what is known as the Cut. The walls in this covered over 140 years ago by the Cornish and Welsh miners and then known as dry-stoning or dry-stacking. This is one that uses no cement stone or mortar but merely gravity and friction will hold these walls. The only modern edition, of course, block underneath gold added to the left side wall about 36 years ago. Before the out of the way by other than that, these walls remain unchanged and a testimony to the craftsmanship of these early miners. Now, speaking of the miners, in just one moment, we'll be stopping at 11 on to pick up the last form group we sent off on the last journey. Yes, everyone remains on board the train and it will be underway as soon as we pick up these last miners. But I do have one question for you all, though. What do you call a nose-picking miner? Why, I was called a gold digger. Irony, of course, being that this mine and its competitor were silver on. And minery from Shea was employed. Now, following World War I, because of poor financial decisions and the rise of the automobile, that line was scrapped. Now, passenger service was continued on this line until 1927, but by that point, it had dwindled. Now, there's still a need for 2 freight trains weekly into the Great Depression. Well, by 1937, that dropped down to sporadic monthly train. And so in 1938, the railroad filed for bankruptcy and the ICC for abandonment. And between the years of 1939 and 1941, the entire railroad was scrapped back down to gold, receiving a whopping $650 as a return investment. Not quite the return they had hoped for, considering the high bridge alone cost $250 million to construct, and tracks average about $51,000 a mile. Now you may be wondering if the original railroad was scrapped, what are we riding on today? Well, folks, I assure you this is no ghost train. You see, starting as early as 1951, plans were made to place the predecessor to I-70, US Highway 6, straight to this railroad grade. In the 1960s, much of the original line was built over. When the locals realized the valuable railroading and mining history is here, and that the highway moved to where it's just today on the side of Republican Mountain. And starting in 1973, the Colorado Historical Society sought to rebuild this line. Now 3 miles of track was donated by the Union Pacific, and with the assistance of the United States Navy Seabees under the code name of Silver Spike, reconstruction started out of Silver Plume. Now in 1975, Lindsay and Rose Ashby were appointed the first contractors to run this line. They brought their narrow gauge expertise and steam locomotives to their Central City Railroad and acquired a 60-foot clear-cross bridge to Bridge Clear Creek. Now, of course, it wasn't until the summers of 1983 and 84 the new double-stage viaduct was constructed, all in time for the 1985 running season. And now we're over our 40th season of operations over the Georgetown Loop, a testimony to the many hard-working volunteers and to the many employees working this line today. Now, speaking of dedication, how do you make it to the locomotive Olympics? Well, I'll tell you that you have to train really hard.
She loves you, Ricky.
For those of you not taking any much cars, if you look to the left, there's an old wood wagon on the downhill. Now that used to be the entrance of the old Everett Silver Mine. The Everett Mine, the Lebanon Mine, were two competing silver mines into the same vein of silver ore. Now following numerous legal battles, prosecutors of busy copper through has to be forward back middle. That same day. Now on the left side here, you might notice one of our local prospectors, Charlie. Now he's been trying hard to strike a rich, but he's been worked to the bone. Now if you're curious which mines produce silver and which gold, the one above by 70, the gray coloration of the rocks is Argentiferous galena, silver ore. And up lingering to the east, the rusty red color is an indication of gold mining. We'll now be entering into a clearing known as the Hall Tunnel. The entrance to the Hall Tunnel itself was once located at the rear of the stone line principally headed over. It was originally constructed as a means of transporting primarily ore as well as floodwater from the south side of the Leavenworth Mountain to this side of the mountain. However, halfway through, the tellers hit the worst of luck and found perhaps the richest vein of silver ore in the upper Clear Creek Valley area. And like the greedy miners they were, never made it to the other side. You could say they decided to mind their own business. Down to the right side of the train, here the old rusty machine was once an Ingersoll Rand air compressor that powered all the air tools in this mine. It said that it was so loud you could hear it all the way down in Georgetown. And the left side of our front side there, the old stove foundation was once the old boiler house. Now this mine soon proved so profitable it outlasted the repeal of Sherman Silver for sack, saw its way through World War I, the wrath of the Great Depression, and even the scrapping of the original railroad, only shutting their doors in 1942 due to a ban being placed on precious metal lining. Now it's important to realize just how profitable this area was, generating about $200 million worth of silver. And today find out that its tank purchase power is $5.6 billion. And one of the earliest miners in this area was a gentleman by the name of George Burnett, who came here in 1859 looking to strike it rich. And when he did, they called the area below Georgetown. Georgetown is also known as the Silver Queen of the Rockies. This production of silver ore was so high here, they lined the streets with it, fully being sanctified production of one, Leadville, the Silver King. Then our train has now entered into a curve, into which if you look to the left side of our train, you'll notice the lower tracks of the loop. We were on those tracks earlier, and just a few short minutes we'll join them once more. For those of you unfamiliar with the story of the Georgetown Loop, this was a surveyor's enter into a highly perplexing problem. You see all the towns of Georgetown and Silver Plume are only about 2 miles apart on a map. They are for an elevation by about 600 feet. A rise of which plays from the valley floor to the top, and Silver Plume would have come out to a 6.5% grade, nearing that of I-70. Now, the steam locomotives could not make it up such a steep grade, and so instead the route was built to double back over itself, thus decreasing the average grade on this line to 3.5%, but increasing the distance town to town to 4.5 miles by rail. And while there are perhaps 4 or 5 other locations in the world that did the same, in all cases but ours, the roller tracks were usually enclosed in a tunnel. But in our case, we head over these spectacular Devil's Gate viaducts. Now to the left side of our train here, there is a white sign in the north between 2 lines. That is actually a milepost, meaning that we are once located 52 miles away from Denver's Union Station as of this point. And while we know our connection down to Denver today, we still employ the mile marker since to determine our location on this railroad. Speak of the devil, we are now headed over the Devil's Gate Viaduct. Now we will ask that you please secure all loose articles of clothing as well as any kind-shaped children not fly away in the strong breezes that may occur here. The bridge is perhaps so called the Devil's Gate because the old timers would say that the strong breezes would sound like the bellows of a devil. And the span of this canyon is often compared to as the gate. It's Devil's Gate. Now for your trivia file, the bridge is about 300 feet in length, about the size of an average American football field. And while it looks equal, it should be dropping about 6 feet side to side on an 18.5 degree left-hand curve. Now, if you are afraid of heights, don't look down. It's about a 75 feet down to our tracks and about 100 feet down to clear waters of Clear Creek. But if you are afraid of heights, we do have a small recommendation for you. If you look at the bottom of your car, I'd like to see a small stone bevel. I'd like you to pick that bevel up and perhaps roll it through your fingers. Really focus on the texture of that stone, and you just might begin to feel a little older. Now, we hope you don't take that show for granted. This was actually a small stone marker left side of our train here at the end of the parking lot. It was moved there in 1949 by the Colorado Historical Society to commemorate the original railroad and bridge, anticipating to rebuild this line about 30 years later. Whoa! Now, as for the train you're riding on today, these cars were originally narrow gauge freight cars, some of which were converted to passenger service in our very own Silver Plume shops. And many of these cars came from the old Denver Rio Grande Western, which narrow gauge portions of which lasted from the years of 1870 to 1969, primarily in southwestern Colorado. And 2 portions of which survive today is the Ringo and Silverton and the Cumbres and Soltec. Now, as for your steam locomotive, the origin today is the number 40. The 40 was built in September of 1920 by the Baltimore Motor Company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's known as a 280 consolidation or a B4G. Now, this engine was originally intended for use on the international railways of Central America, handling bananas and sugarcane and the occasional passenger train in El Salvador and later Guatemala. Now it came back to the United States for the Central City Railroad, the Ashby's, and when the Ashby's came here, it came to the Georgetown Loop. Now it remained here until the Ashby's left, and then it could be found in the Colorado Road Museum in Golden, Colorado, before being restored and returning to service here. Now this locomotive is not burning coal or wood, but oil. It always has, and it always will. Now, in just one moment here, you'll hear a long, blasting sequence of 40's whistle. It's a national grade crossing sequence, or letter Q in Morse code. Now, what does the letter Q have to do with railroading? Absolutely nothing. This is adopted from Victorian Europe, where steamships would blow the Q sequence indicating the Queen or monarchy was aboard. And we will blow to signify the Queen, but to signify that we have the right of way. So always stop, look, and let's just roll our train. And here is that sequence right about now. who your engineer was, but just simply listen to the way they blow that whistle. And I'll tell you that today, your engineer is Willie. He's been running trains here at the Georgetown Loop for about 20 years now. And we're now going over Clear Creek for the fourth and final time in our journey today. Here the way going a mile in the 12 slides, I'm nearly 3.5 miles by rail as of this point, and dropped in elevation of approximately 563 feet. And if you look to the right side of our train, you may notice that plateau we arrived at a few short minutes ago. Showing here the flexing nature of the Georgetown Loop, so we spiral back over ourselves and make the maximum grade on this line approximately 4.13%. Now, in just one moment here, your journey will be coming to its conclusion. We'd like to thank you all. Oh, by the way, we do indeed have some deer laying to the left side of our train. As I was saying, thank you all for joining us. Please have all of your first belongings in just part of your train. And the Colorado State Patrol, the Georgetown Loop Railroad, urge you please drive safely. And while the Georgetown Loop might be a narrow gauge railroad, we sincerely hope the gauge of our service was not narrow. And while we might go sidetracked from time to time in our duties, we hope that you would find none of our jokes to be too utterly derailing. And as we're gradually starting to run out of steam, we'd like to welcome you back to Devil's Gate, elevation 8,615 feet above sea level. And on behalf of the line, we hope to see you again real soon. Thank you much and safe travels.
And on that bombshell, because I was in the bathroom when 40 left me back for the shops because I'm an idiot for timing my bathroom break so poorly. Thank you, Dad, for catching all that for me while I was away. I am going to end this footage with a montage of my excess footage, as well as everything shot by my dad. Because he's awesome. I'm the Rocket City Railfan, and I'll see you again on the High Iron.
We'll be stopping at 11 on 1. Take off the last one. The international railways of Central America. And the occasional passenger train goes on the north and later in Guatemala. Now being back to the United States for the Central City Railroad. And we do have a little railroad museum with some vintage pieces of Colorado and some other equipment. And some rather scary looking mannequins. Now we will ask that you please return to the train by 4:35. That is 4:35. Welcome to Silver Plume, elevation 9,178 feet above sea level. Please remain seated until the train comes to a full and complete stop. Thank you. Please keep your hands inside of the train. Thank you.